Okay. Well, we're going to get started. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. We're very happy to present Anthony Burch to you. I really doubt you don't know if you're here, but just so you know, he was the head writer for Borderlands 2, and he also was co-creator with his sister for Hey Ash, What's Your Plan? Which is pretty awesome. If you don't know that, you should check it out. Basically, he's going to be talking about comedy and what he does and how he does it. So, not wasting more time. Cool.
So just to get this out of the way, I'm bad at everything. This talk's going to be like 15 minutes, it's going to be super meandering, it's going to be weird, and I'm going to rely on you to give me like cool questions for the next 2 hours to justify my presence here. And I'll just do Cora reenactments. Okay, so my talk is called Dying is Funny, Comedy is Easy. My name is Anthony Burch, and I've worked in video games for around 6 years, 3 of them as a critic for Destructo.com. I review a lot of games and other features editor. One person read it. And another thing as a writer at Gearbox Software. I was the lead writer for Borderlands 2. Today, I'm going to try to link Jonathan Blow's design philosophy with the word boner farts. You're going to come away from this talk certain that I'm an enormous asshole. So, this talk is called Dying is Funny, Comedy is Easy, which is A, a version of Mel Brooks' famous Dying is Easy, Comedy is Hard quote, and B, a super fucking douchey thing to say because comedy isn't easy. Comedy is based on subversion of expectations, and the more you tell one particular kind of joke, the more expected that kind of joke becomes, and therefore the less funny it is. Therefore, must constantly shift and mutate in an effort to surprise its audience in different ways. It's kind of like the metagame in a MOBA. If the community runs 2-1-2 lane placements long enough that everyone gets a pretty good idea how to counter it, eventually the metagame shifts so that 1-1-2 becomes more common or 3-1-1 or whatever. Similarly, it's really hard to laugh at a Laurel and Hardy short anymore because we've become so immune to the charms of watching people fall on their butts while shrugging at the camera in an aw shucks kind of way. We've learned that pattern of humor, and it stopped being surprising, and comedy therefore had to change. Obviously, some comedy is timeless. Douglas Adams and the Marx Brothers are still funny no matter what. But comedy on the whole tends to age much, much worse than other genres in art forms. I'll honestly be very surprised that Borderlands 2's comedy is still remotely amusing to anyone in 50 years. Maybe 15, I don't know. Just as I'd be surprised if high-level wall meta didn't change in the next 5. Basically what I'm saying is Katarina's OQP rebalance. Now I bring all this up because if comedy's #1 enemy is repetition and familiarity, then that puts video games in a really good space for comedy. Because most video games simply aren't funny. And I don't mean that they try and fail, I mean that they don't even try, period, most of the time. So I talked to Davey Redden, who's the creator of the Stanley Parable, which is a mod for Half-Life 2 that is out in the free version, and there's a more fleshed-out version coming out soon that's going to be really good. And he pointed out how odd it is that comedies aren't a genre of game. Horror is a genre of game. Romance is a genre of game. Action is a genre of game. We often talk about how much video games have so much untapped potential in terms of making the player feel despair or sadness or love, but I'd argue that comedy is equally unexplored territory. For a totally unscientific example, let's look at someone's Steam library. Let's look at my Steam library. So, I own 444 games on Steam because I'm irresponsible and have no children. And of those 444, only 57 include what I'm going to arbitrarily call a non-trivial amount of comedy, either through gameplay or through dialogue. The games I categorized here go from something like Surgeon Simulator 2013, which is fucking hilarious entirely because of its gameplay. Does anybody know what this is? Do you know what this game is? Yeah. Well done. Something like Left 4 Dead, which I tossed in purely because the protagonists occasionally like tell jokes. The gameplay isn't actually funny, but like sometimes Zoe will say a funny thing about aliens. So 57 out of 444. That means only about 13% of the games that I own include a notable amount of comedy, and I'm being super bullish on what defines comedy, and I'm also someone who goes out of his way to find and play comedy. So why don't we have more comedy games? I don't know. I can't say for sure. Maybe because comedy is risky. If a joke fails, that can make an entire room of people fall silent. Whereas if a badass one-liner fails, like in a Gears of War game or something like that, you can kind of like grit and get through it. It's not really that big of a deal. Maybe because people think comedy is being really, really difficult, because it is. But at the same time, it's not that difficult. It's not harder to do in video games than tragedy or badassedness, and in my opinion, it's a lot easier. Most video games are inherently fun. Their gameplay is based around things that are either really surprising, really crazy, and over the top, and that kind of just naturally makes you laugh. So when you fall into a spike trap in Spelunky when you didn't expect to. You laugh. Everybody plays Spelunky, right? You should all play Spelunky. When you hit a pedestrian with a car in Grand Theft Auto, when that pedestrian flies into a hot dog cart and the hot dog cart then explodes for no reason, you laugh. When you build a little fort made out of vending machines so that nobody can see you hack a terminal in Deus Ex Human Revolution, you laugh. When the AI looks stupid or something unexpected happens, or when you do something so clever that you seemingly trivialize huge swaths of the game, you laugh. But in many cases, the stories of these kinds of games want us to take them really seriously. We used to have a phrase to describe this kind of inconsistency, rhymed with ludonarrative dissonance. But for some reason, saying it these days discredits your entire argument, so I'm just not going to say that. In a 2008 lecture entitled Conflicts in Game Design, Jonathan Blow, creator of Braid and the Witness, said the following: story games are inherently conflicted. People can sense a conflict at work. It won't strike them deeply. Disharmonious, it won't resonate. How can we remove the conflict? Now, he was talking specifically about how authored meaning and dynamic meaning work against each other. He wasn't talking specifically about tonal consistency, but I still think the point is relevant even if we're just talking about tone. So here's another slide from that same talk. These screenshots are from the first Deus Ex game, and he uses an example of how player agency can sort of sabotage what you're trying to do in a tonal point of view. So this is J.C. Denton is the main character, the dude with sunglasses. And he is talking to Jamie Reyes in this bottom left-hand image about how the government might have poisoned the poorest people in America to like gain control of the Illuminati, and they're talking in these really, really gruff voices. And all the while, there's a big fucking American flag right between them that the player just picked up and placed down there because it's got to be funny. So all these really dramatic cutscenes have an American flag just sort of waving in the wind, just arbitrarily, really undermining the entire tone of those scenes. Blow then went on to talk about how art games like Jason Rohr's Gravitation deal with this conflict of dynamic meaning versus authored meaning, and how something like Gravitation or something like Passage imbues its basic mechanics with symbolic meaning, and that's how they get around that sort of problem. Blow has a lot of different solutions to the problem, all of them super, super intelligent. My solution for this problem, or at least one solution, is the following: boner farts. So this is a screenshot from a quest that we did in Borderlands 2. Really goofy, really mature. Long story short, this zoologist guy, Sir Hammerlock, wants to come up with a better name for these creatures called Bullymongs, and through a bunch of different misadventures, he gets really sick and tired of picking up new names, and he goes, ah, fuck, let's call them boner farts. Kind of crazy. Yeah. Hooray. And the reason Borderlands 2 has a quest about boner farts instead of a quest about saving dying children set to violin music or something like that is because Borderlands 2's gameplay is inherently funny. I'm going to show you a trailer for the original Borderlands before it underwent a massive art style change and shipped into But first we're going to watch an advertisement for Call of Duty Ghosts. Fuck you.
Why have you come here? Only fools and criminals come to this planet. This is a dangerous place. If the bandits don't get you, the wildlife will. You won't last long here. Not without help. Not without guns. A hell of a lot of guns. Why have you come here? You're looking for the vault, aren't you? You won't find it. I'll tell you the same thing I told all those who came before you. It doesn't exist.
Okay, so it's pretty serious stuff. And now I'm going to show you a trailer for Borderlands 2.
A deadly shot from nowhere.
All right. So I didn't work on the first Borderlands, so this might all come off as hearsay. But I think Randy Pitchford and Brian Martell are on record in a bunch of places as basically saying that before the art style change, Borderlands took place in a fairly serious universe. Fuck you! Actually, it's probably signed with my phone. Once the gameplay got more fleshed out, though, and became clear that the more over-the-top mechanics like setting a dude on fire or melting a dude's face off with lightning and stuff, when it became clear that those were the really fun mechanics, the old tone and the old art style didn't match the more over-the-top direction of the actual game design. Once the gameplay, after the story gained characters like Tannis and Crazy Earl and Scooter, the story's emotions felt a lot more in parity with the gameplay's emotions. The game made you laugh, and so the story did too. And this is why I want to see more comedy games. As so many modern AAA games are about empowering the player to a positively batshit degree, and because being batshit powerful is inherently kind of funny, comedy can often be a better fit for these sorts of games than tragedy or high drama. This is a man with a gun that has a chainsaw in it, chopping up an alien. That's fucking funny. If someone walked around Borderlands 2 holding around an American flag, it wouldn't actually feel all that out of place for the world that we created. Like, it'd feel a little bit weird, not that weird. And not only that, but comedy comes with its own set of advantages. People are really willing to forgive weird shit if it makes them laugh. There's a bit in the Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Heat expansion that we did, where we needed the player to blow up a couple of blimps outside of the main starting village. They're kind of irrelevant to the story. We just wanted you to do something that was visually interesting, something that changed the state of the environment, something that gave you some gameplay thing to do after you showed up to our main town. So I was trying to figure out why the player narratively needed to do this. Are they like scared of the blimps? Is there something bad in the blimps? Is there something they need in the blimps, but then that has to come back later in the story and they might not even remember about the blimps like 2 minutes after they destroy them? All the reasons I came up with were just kind of shitty and I didn't like them. So instead I did this.
First task, blow up the village's scouting blimps with the fire burner. Because reasons!
So that's a complete cheat. That's completely lazy and unfair. But it kind of worked. You can't do that all the time, but I think the people who laughed at that moment sort of forgave the fact that there was really no logical reason to destroy those blimps other than Mr. Torque said so. I think if you didn't laugh, that the whole section of the game is kind of irritating, but if you did laugh, yay, everything's fine. Humor also allows you to do really crazy things that can result in much cooler gameplay. Everyone that's already laughing is cool because you know what that is. If anyone in this room hasn't played Saints Row 4, oh my god, play Saints Row 4. It is one of the best sandbox games ever made, period. So this is the dubstep gun from Saints Row 4. And it probably goes without saying that this gun would not exist in a more serious game. But in addition to the fact that it's just plain funny, the way it works is you just shoot it at enemies, or really anything, because it's Saints Row. A bunch of wub lasers come out, and then the people start dancing and twerking until they die. In addition to how funny that is inherently, it's also interesting gameplay-wise. Because it does, and I believe this is accurate, and I'm not shitting you, because it does damage per wub, and because the firing rate varies based on where the song is, just sort of in its runtime, the gun is actually really, really shitty at the beginning as the song is like sort of getting up before the big drop. And in the middle it gets really good once all the wubs hit. And at the end of the song it's a little bit shittier because the firing rate slows down a little bit. That's a fairly small thing, but it's directly connected to the joke of the idea that this is a gun that shoots dubstep music, and it actually changes the way you use the gun. Whereas a machine gun or a pistol, you might pop a bunch of different people, just sort of headshot each one of them. The dubstep gun requires you to sort of keep it on your target and keep there for a while, even while the song is warming up, and you actually have to think about the cooldown of the wubs and all that shit. Like, it's actually really interesting and funny, and it came from a desire just to sort of be a gag and make the player laugh, but more gameplay consequences arose because of it. I also think that some game designers might be worried that comedy is too financially risky, that people, when you think of Joe consumer, I guess, that they want to be heroes and badasses and brr, but not the protagonists of a laughing at yuck fest, like nobody wants to be Steve Martin in The Jerk, kind of thing. Which, I don't know, maybe. Like, Call of Duty certainly does pretty well, and it's about as funny as puppies dying or an episode of Big Bang Theory. But Portal did pretty well, and Team Fortress 2 did pretty well, and Cliff Bleszinski may say that Saints Row turns him off because it's got dildo bats in it, but there have been 4 Saints Row games. It's pretty damn rare for an open world franchise to get 4 installments, just given how difficult they are to produce. There aren't 4 Crackdown games. There aren't 4 True Crime Streets of LA games. But there are 4 games where you're given money for flinging your body into traffic and seeing how badly you can injure yourself. Now, like I said at the top of the talk, comedy's hard, but it's not the hardest thing in the world. How many games have made you laugh? A dozen, a couple dozen, just whatever comes to mind, just think of that. Off the top of my head, these are the ones that come to mind for me. It's not Bioshock because of the way the gameplay works, where like I had a moment in Bioshock where I tossed down a plasma to hypnotize the guy, I think, and then he shot behind me, and I was like, oh god, what's he doing? He's not supposed to be shooting at me, but the bullet went right behind me and hit an explosive barrel, and a splicer flew on fire past my shoulder. I was like, hey, thank you, dude! This sort of gets into what I was talking about earlier about how the gameplay is inherently kind of funny. Bioshock is this very grim game, and then Bioshock is one of my favorite games of all time, and I'm trying to talk shit about it, and I work with a guy who's the lead designer of it, so I definitely am going to talk shit about it. But the way that those systems come together in really surprising ways can often make you laugh really hard. When I think about the way that, like, the first time you see somebody using a super bomb to take down a Big Daddy, which is like, okay, I'll find a trash can, and I'll take out my proximity mine gun, and I'll just shoot 15 proximity mines onto it, and I'll pick it up,